But this is about, it's the same teenage boy. Remember the one who was all the time playing video games and with a mess in the house. So the grandfather decided to, to take him away a little bit from all that electronics and things. I said, grandson, why don't you come to celebrate Sukkot in my sukkah tonight? We're going to have a nice dinner, and then we're going to, the weather is nice, we're going to spend the night on the sukkahs. Nature is going to be good for you, it's going to be for the two of us. So sure, go there. So the night of Sukkot, they have dinner in the sukkah, and after the nice dinner, they went to sleep. In the middle of the night, the grandfather wakes up his grandson, and he asked him, said, look at the sky, what do you see? He said, I see millions of stars. Well, what is it telling you? And the teenage boy wants to impress his grandpa, right? So he thinks a little bit, and he says, astronomically, it's telling me that there are millions of stars and potentially billions of planets. Astrologically, it's telling me that Saturn is in Leo. Horologically, it's telling me that there is 3:15. Theologically, it's telling me that there is a creator and we are small and insignificant. And meteorologically, it's telling me that tomorrow is going to be a nice day. And he looks at his grandfather and said, what is that telling you, Grandpa? He said, it's telling me that somebody stole our sukkah. I want to talk to you today about less is more. Less is more. But before I go to that, I don't know if you noticed that Sukkot is probably one of the most unusual festivals that we have. It breaks the pattern of all the other holidays where we are inside, beautiful tablecloth, the candles in the house, fancy dinner. Sukkot is totally the opposite. Is the opposite. And perhaps the fanciest of the festival in the year is probably the Passover Seder. And it's a little bit fancier than Shabbat and things, but it's interesting to me that we have the 4 questions, sometimes even more than 4 questions. During the Passover Seder, we are encouraged to ask, why do we do this? Why do we do that? Right? Well, in reality, it's not much different from other fancy dinners that we have. But in Sukkot, that everything is so different, right? You go outside, everything is very rustic. We don't want to put our best tablecloth. God forbid it rains, it may get ruined, right? Same with some of the china or the thing we have to be. It's very rustic. And why aren't we encouraged to ask the 4 questions on Sukkot, and we do it on Pesach? Have you ever wondered? To me, it would make more sense for the rabbis to give us a Haggadah where we ask questions about Sukkot. Why do we do this, Mishigas? To go outside when the rest of the year we celebrate inside, right? And I realized that perhaps it is because we are looking at the festival of Sukkot from a totally wrong perspective, okay? But to understand that, we have to go back in time to the times of the Talmud. There, the rabbis they discussed the why we celebrate Sukkot. And I know, usually if you went through Hebrew Day School, they taught you that we live in the sukkah because of the Israelites has to build this booth, right? These little shelters when they left Egypt. And that's why we have the sukkah, right? Is that the spiel you were told at school? So if that's what you were told, that is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. He said, on Sukkot, we celebrate Sukkot because the Israelites have to build themselves these shelters, and then we do the same. Rabbi Akiva. But Rabbi Eliezer, which actually was the opinion that actually won the vote, Rabbi Eliezer said, no, we live in Sukkot, we build ourselves these little shelters in remembrance of the Hananei Kavod, which means the clouds of glory. And it used to be a miraculous cloud that used to protect the Israelites on their journey from Egypt to Israel. Sometimes we don't talk about that, or we don't even remember about it. The Torah mentioned these clouds multiple times, right? They say, for example, when the cloud will move, they had to pack up and move to the next destination, and so forth for 40 years, right? That's why so that clouds represented the divine protection. So the sukkah that we built outside is to remind us of the divine protection that we have every day in our lives, because that is what it was represented by the clouds of glory. But now, there were two clouds of glory, and let me explain. When the Israelites left Egypt, God placed over them the clouds of glory. Those clouds of glory were lost when they built the golden calf. As a punishment, God removed those clouds, that it was an explicit symbol of the presence of God. Okay? And then the rabbi said that eventually those clouds came back. When did they came back? Well, according to the rabbis, Yom Kippur is the time when Moses came back with the second set of the tablets of the law. That's Yom Kippur, historically. It wasn't a Yom Kippur that Moses came back. Immediately after, Moses gave the commandment to build the Mishkan, a tabernacle for God. So immediately after that first Yom Kippur there in the desert, they started a big fundraising to get all the funds to build the tabernacle. Once they got all the money and the materials, they were ready to start building it. And so they started the preparations to build the new Mishkan when? On Sukkot, which was a few days after Yom Kippur. And when God saw that commitment of the people of Israel with the Torah, the Ananei HaKavod, the clouds of glory, came back once again. And then we could again experience the presence of God. So the sukkahs that we have in our backyards are in remembrance of those second sets of the clouds of glory. But the rabbi said, why did we lose the first one? And it was because we basically pay attention to the wrong things. The Israelites, instead of paying attention of the presence of God, paying attention to the relationship that they build with God, they pay attention on the gold that they needed to build this golden calf. They pay attention on the material things, and they forgot about the spiritual connection with God. And because of that distraction, cloud of glory were removed. When Moses came back the second time and they learned the lesson and they started to pay attention to the right thing, they got the gold again, but this time was for the good purpose. When they understood that message, they got the clouds of glory again. So when we have the sukkah outside, it's a reminder not only of the clouds of glory, of course, but it's also of what is really important in life. And that's why it is so bare minimum. And that's why there is nothing to ask, because that's the way our lives should be. And I don't know if you realize that when our lives start getting too many distractions, then at the end of the day, we forget what is really important. What do we do in the sukkah after all, right? Let's say you have dinner with somebody, you have nice time with your family and friends. You realize how uncomfortable that usually is. You know, sometimes, especially in Winnipeg, it's cold, it's windy, it may rain at any time. You don't even have probably comfortable chairs. It's not the nicest table. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter because, we forget about that pretty quickly and we start paying attention to the time we spend with family, the time we spend with friends, maybe the blessings we think. Maybe we even look up and we remember the presence of God. So the sukkah is coming to teach us the same way that the second set of the clouds of glory came to teach us that sometimes less is more, especially when we want to start paying attention to the right things. And again, when you start getting all these uncomfortable things, but eventually you don't care about that anymore because you realize that even with that bare minimum, you can be joyous. Then you realize that the more in life that you can say, it doesn't matter, the better. How many times we make a big deal out of nothing? So the more we can understand that, many of the physical things that we pay too much attention to doesn't really matter. perhaps the secret to have a joyous life is somewhere else. And Sukkot is coming to remind us. So this Sukkot, when you are into the Sukkah, remember that just like the Sukkah, sometimes less is more. And the more we can say about things in life, it doesn't really matter, the happier we can be. Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach.